how did we get to the point where a virtual influencer, a CGI, is something that's actually acceptable and is followed so tremendously? And then we're going to see, like, what can we learn about our own human nature based on what's happening around us. So before we fully get into it, as Steve said, I'm TDMC co-founder. While on campus, I started the chapter of AK Psi with a few other folks. My day-to-day job has always been in social media. I had my own company, Tracksuit, worked at Tumblr, currently work at Pinterest. I'm a fast-talking New Yorker, if you can't tell by now. And outside of that, I do a lot of things in the virtual space. So this is going to be crazy sounding, but I have a virtual architecture firm that I'm a co-founder of, where we build buildings for the metaverse. Companies have worked with us to have virtual office spaces. This is all insane, trust me. I don't believe it every day, but it's happening. And I think that COVID really accelerated a lot of these trends, which will be a recurring theme, right? So let's get back to the main star of the show today, Michaela Souza. I'm just here to tell her story. Michaela is a 19-year-old from California. She's Brazilian American. She speaks many languages. She has strong followings across the board. She's released 12 singles on Spotify. So, she's recurring about 1 million monthly listens on Spotify. You can see she has 3 million followers on Instagram. She has a big following on TikTok, YouTube, Tumblr, Twitter. It doesn't end. She recently released NFTs, so she's making sort of ephemeral content that's now living forever in the blockchain. So it's like this sort of weird dichotomy of what's real and what's not. And the craziest thing about it is, if we look at Michaela and what she's accomplished in her life at this age, being signed by CAA. CAA is a talent agency that represents Ryan Gosling, Reese Witherspoon, Kanye West, Lady Gaga, Beyonce. I mean, Michaela is represented by the same talent agency that represents Beyonce. I mean, that's crazy to me, And Michaela's a robot. Michaela doesn't exist. Michaela is a series of bits, not atoms, that make up, the rest of us in the room. So what's different from what Chris and Sydney told you about, the influence that Chris has, the influence that Sydney and the team for Ryan Serhant has, is that Michaela is made up. I mean, she's 19 years old, but is she anything? She's been 19 since 2016 when she was created. And this is pretty crazy. So Michaela and what she's doing brings up this topic of the uncanny valley. So a roboticist in Japan back in the 70s had this theory that whether you're looking at, puppetry, like puppet theater, or you're looking at, this was in the 70s, so he could never imagine that Michaela would have existed, or you're looking at some sort of robotic arm in an assembly line. It's really the movement of these things that make them feel more human. If you just see a prosthetic hand, for instance, and it's just sitting there on the table, you're like, oh yeah, that's a prosthetic hand, right? But thankfully, because of advances in science, prosthetic hands can now be controlled by, the person who's using them, and they could be controlled the same way almost as a hand would be controlled before. And that's what brings more life to an actual object. So the uncanny valley is this dip, right? It's this area where if you add movement to something, it feels more real, even though it's a humanoid robot. Whereas if it's standing still and static, you can not really relate to it as much. That's why when we see these robots put out by like Boston Dynamics and stuff, and they're walking around, you're like, oh wow, that's like a little scary. And that scariness is, the uncanny valley taking its own form within us. But Michaela's been pushing boundaries in other ways. So recently, Michaela has been doing partnerships with a lot of fashion brands. And, whether it's Prada, Givenchy, I always have a lot of anxiety saying Givenchy, or these other brands, she's taking over their Instagram. She's taking it over for like Fashion Week. She's interviewing celebrities at music festivals. I don't know how this is all happening, right? She's releasing commercials, and she's really reminding us that Michaela and other virtual influencers are doing what real influencers want to do, but they're doing it in a different way because they're only built for our attention. That's it. She has nothing else that she has to do in her life but take our attention. And when you look at an ad like this that she did with Calvin Klein, you see that she's here, and first you have Bella Hadid, who's an influencer, very much so in her own right. You have Michaela, and even though it's a CGI version of Michaela, they kiss each other. Now, you can imagine that this ad went viral online. There was a lot of controversy. The LGBTQ, some people from that community pushed back and said, you know, what has Calvin Klein really done to support us? And yet they're putting this out there. And all I say to that, right, especially with my marketing hat on, is Michaela is engineered for our attention. And if that ad was not controversial, would it have gotten our attention? Maybe not. If Michaela was just wearing Calvin Klein, okay, virtual influencer does another partnership with, you know, some brand. But I think that's what we need to remind ourselves of. But we also have to remind ourselves of the inherent advantage that a CGI has. She will never die. You know, if we have great-great-grandchildren, they might be following Michaela on these platforms. So she is optimized for a following unlike any of us are. And that is insane. She also has an infinite wardrobe, a really small carbon footprint because she doesn't actually go anywhere. But she could also show up in 100 places at the same time and speak to everyone in their native tongue. And that's not something that I could do, Chris could do, or Sydney could do. It's pretty spectacular. So how did we get here? How did we get to this crazy point where there's 3 million people following CGI on Instagram and other channels? And I wanted to transpose the graph on Google of, you know, interest over time. I love fooling around with this Google Trends tool. You know, it's so fun. Like type in a word or a topic like influencer. And when did influencer pop? It's hard to see, but you know, if you zoom in a little bit, I'll do it for you. It's right around here is like 2015. And that's really when, you know, influencer as an idea starts taking shape. People are searching for it. You know, what is an influencer? How do I become one? How much money do they make? All those things. But we have to go back to 2007 because on June 29, 2007, Steve Jobs released the iPhone. And whether it was the iPhone or another device that would have took over, especially here in the States, the iPhone is really what allowed us to all be connected at all times. It gave social media all the downtime when you're on the bus, checking out at the grocery store, in a talk that's getting a little bit boring. It gave you all the downtime to you know, check your feeds. 4G LTE was released a few years later, and I think that's the moment when the iPhone really came alive. It was able to process mobile internet unlike it was before, so you know, it gave the iPhone a little bit of life. Only a few months later, Instagram filters came out. Now, this is the first instance, I think, where despite our own reality, our reality was not good enough. Our reality was boring. We wanted to take a photo that we just took and make it look better because we were optimizing for engagement the same way that Michaela does much better than we do, right? So when Instagram filters were released, I think that's the first time that we can say we were trying to become virtual because we knew that what we were seeing in front of us was not optimized for what we wanted to show the world. 2013, the word of the year, selfie, right? At Pinterest, we always say it's about yourself, not your selfie. You don't really post selfies on Pinterest, but selfies are a big part of most social media. And that's how a lot of people, you know, garner attention, show off a new look, a new hairstyle, etc. Fast forward, Snapchat filters. Now this took the selfie and this transmorphed it into something of its own beast. For younger people to maybe feel more comfortable sharing their face. Snapchat was primarily targeted to younger people. At first, maybe you have an acne breakout and you want a little bit of a face filter. Snapchat filters allowed you to make fun of yourself in a fun way and all of a sudden you became like a dog. And when you stick your tongue out, this giant dog tongue comes out, and it's fun, right? I'm sure you've all connected with like younger family members or children on using a Snapchat filter and having fun with that. But it's evolved into a different place. The same time Snapchat filters came out, this app called Facetune came out that a lot of young people pay $10. And when you're young, $10 is a lot of money. And that removes your blemishes, that makes you feel better. I mean, you fast forward to COVID, and there's been an 80% increase in plastic surgeries because of Zoom anxiety. We're not used to looking at ourselves that long. 80% increase in facial plastic surgery and like a 15% increase in plastic surgery overall. And that's crazy because we weren't going anywhere. Why are we so self-conscious? It's because technology confronts us with a mirror all day long. 2019, Lego did a study with the Harris poll, and they surveyed 3,000 children ages 8 to 12. 1,000 in the United States, 1,000 in the UK, and 1,000 in China. In the US and the UK, 56% of these 8 to 12-year-olds, their primary ambition for what they wanted to be in their lives was a YouTube star. I'm sorry, it was 2/3, it was like 60-something%. In China, the primary ambition was astronaut, and that was 56%, followed by teacher. America has always been known for its media and our culture, right? Tell me another country where you are listening to their music and watching their movies as regularly as you are American movies and music. I don't know, for most of us it probably doesn't exist. And for a lot of people around the world, our culture and is one of our biggest exports, frankly. But you get to the point where so many people want to be famous that over the course of COVID, influencers, social media influencers on Instagram were renting space in fake private jets to say to their fans and their followings that they were traveling. Now I say this to sort of make fun of it a little bit, but it just shows how sick it could become to continuously put up a front or another person, like a representative of yourself for a fan base. And I think what Chris said about being your authentic self online and in person is the only way you could possibly do this without going nuts, because otherwise it would just be too tiring to have two people. One of the other things that we led to Michaela for sure, because the founder Trevor, he definitely references Code Miko as a influence. Code Miko is a Twitch streamer. We heard about Twitch earlier with Ninja. And what she does is, whether she's playing video games or just answering questions from her fans, she built this technological rig that makes her face and her emotions control this character. She was tired of being judged on the way that she looked that specific day, so now she could become this semi-cartoon character, but as you can see in the top right photo, maybe not so clearly, she's making a specific facial gesture, and the cartoon character is replicating that. So there's still a human behind it, but it is a sort of technological layer on top to amplify who she is and to allow her to do what she does best, which is doing the stream. So what can we learn from this? And I wanted to put on 3 different hats because I'm a marketer, I work at Pinterest, I'm an investor, I have a small syndicate, and we're all just generally humans. So let me just talk about what we can learn as marketers. And I think what we can learn here is that trust is one of those scarcest digital assets. If you look at the Edelman Trust Index, which is a PR agency, Edelman, you can see that social media is actually at all-time lows in terms of trust. After a lot of conspiracy theories, really contentious elections, all things that have been happening, especially during COVID, it's been really hard to keep the trust of folks. And people much more so trust what their employer tells them, almost by 3x, than what they see on social media these days. Next thing we can learn is that influencer marketing isn't going anywhere. We are that middle bar. We're at $3.7 billion in influencer marketing, and that's only projected to increase over the next couple of years. As investors, we can learn that with success comes, mimicry and, copycats. Michaela's on here, but, if we think back, we could say that Mickey and Minnie Mouse were some of our original virtual influencers, just from the IP. We could say that Tony the Tiger is an influencer, and recently, if you've seen these ads with Shaquille O'Neal, you know, you have Tony the Tiger, what used to be a 2D character when I was young is now this 3D sort of thing that's talking and eating a bowl of cereal with Shaquille O'Neal of all people. So there's gonna be more virtual influencers, and we're gonna get used to this. Some of them are not gonna have that uncanny valley effect of looking human. Some of them will just be cartoons, but they will continue to exist. One that I wanted to point out is Shudu. Shudu, to me, is the first time that I saw a virtual influencer, and I couldn't believe that Shudu wasn't real. Shudu was invented by Cameron, who's a fashion photographer and was a fashion photographer for many years, and all he did was take photos and then try to remove the human elements of his models to make them look more fashion magazine ready. So by knowing exactly what he would always remove on Photoshop, he was able to create Shudu, who, if you see this main orange image, she's actually doing a partnership with Rihanna's beauty line called Fenty. Shudu has, you know, surged in popularity, and to me, you know, if you follow her on Shudugram, it's very hard to tell in a lot of the photos that she's not real. It's pretty incredible what they've built. And then finally, as humans, I wanted to write a quote from Trevor. He was just saying in an interview that they, talking about Michaela and some of the other virtual influencers that they've created at Brud, his company, have a unique opportunity to direct people's attention and energy to the voices, creators, and causes that need it most. We've all known that media is one of the most influential places, right? And one thing that Trevor talks about is during the time that Will and Grace, does anybody remember that show, Will and Grace, that was being aired? A lot of us, yeah. It was a show about Will, a gay man, having a relationship as a friendship with Grace, who's a straight woman, and just, you know, almost like Seinfeld, just talking about nothing and everything at the same time. And after Will and Grace started coming on the air and getting such widespread distribution, that is what led to 2015's moment of allowing and recognizing gay marriage. So Will and Grace had a very significant impact on gay marriage being acceptable. Trevor believes that there's too often not enough attention focused towards the causes that need it most. And that's why Michaela recently became a social activist, and she's very, you know, loudly supports Black Lives Matter, because it's just so important to direct more attention to some of these causes. So, you know, to wrap it up, learnings, human creativity is friggin' astonishing. Michaela is very much so a 0 to 1 improvement than I've ever seen. It's not a faster car, it's a brand new concept of a virtual influencer, it's insane. You know, trust is the scarcest digital asset, and that's why a marketer could feel much more comfortable working with Michaela, knowing that unlike some other influencer, she's not gonna get pulled over on the weekend for a DUI, you know? She's safe to work with. You know everything she's done, everything she said, and there's a team behind her that's gonna program everything she will say. And last but not least, you know, attention is a currency. We talk about cryptocurrency a lot these days, but I really think attention is still the primary currency that's happening online. So thank you so much, and appreciate you staying around.